Dollars for information leading to the arrest of the Mexican drug kingpin known as El Mencho.
If you think death is the worst thing that can happen to a person, think again.
If El Mencho wants you to work for him, you have two options: say yes or be killed.
Because the fate that El Cholo suffered at the hands of El Mencho, the CJNG, was worse than death. The final days of his life were filled with immeasurable agony. The manner of his demise was sickening, and the details of how he died will make your stomach turn. In fact, it's safe to say that death eventually came for the man. It was an act of mercy. Who was El Cholo, and what did he do to deserve his terrible fate? The cruel, cold CJNG cartel. Before we dive into who El Cholo is, we first need to address the organization and the individual he betrayed. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, otherwise known as the CJNG. If you are familiar with this cartel, then you know that no one in their right minds would willingly betray this insane, violent criminal outfit, and yet El Cholo did. In fact, he didn't just cross some low-level underlinings of the cartel. He betrayed the boss himself, the fearsome and infamous El Mencho. Once again, if you know nothing about this man, then use this as an introduction. El Mencho is the devil, plain and simple. Go ask anyone who runs the most brutal cartel, who runs the most brutal criminal organization in the world. They will point to El Mencho and his CJNG. Under his guidance, organization has committed crimes that would make the skin of ISIS terrorist organizations crawl. Because it's not so much what crimes they commit, it's how they commit these crimes. And the ridiculous part is, they're not even half as big as the Sinaloa cartel or any of the rival cartels in the country. They're small, and yet despite their diminutive size, they are the first and so far the only cartel to take on the Mexican government and technically win. Beyond this, they are known for their willingness to use weapons in warfare and their battles against practically anyone who stands in their way. There's a rumor, probably true. They once tried to buy a belt-fed M60 machine gun in the US, and they've gone on record as the first cartel to bring down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. If all this sounds impressive to you, it shouldn't. There's nothing pretty about this cartel. Because when you consider how they treat their victims, including the civilians that they kidnap, it will knock the taste out of your mouth. Legend has it that TJNG cannibalize their victims during the initiation process: children, pregnant women, the elderly. No one is too innocent or too precious to be violated. They've assassinated more government officials than anyone is willing to acknowledge. And there is no doubt that they were behind the assassination of Aristotle Alcindova, the former governor of Jalisco, back in December 2nd, all of this chaos, all of this bloodshed, every hit and every kill is sanctioned by El Mencho, the man that El Cholo portrayed, the same man whom surprisingly was El Cholo's boss and closest friend. With pat math to rebellion, El Mencho started from nothing, born into poverty, and making a living for himself through determination and both feet in the drug trade. He wouldn't meet El Cholo until he became a sicario for the now-defunct Milenio cartel. At the time, they both protected the drug lord Otomondo Valencia Cornelio, alias El Maradona, and it was during this time El Cholo became something of El Mencho's right-hand man. He was there when El Mencho tried to hold the Milenio cartel together, as their bosses either got arrested or died violently, or both El Cholo witnessed. El Mencho reorganized the cartel and renamed it to the CJNG, filling the gap that the Millennial Cartel left. With El Mencho in charge, everyone fell in line. He had a quality that his dead bosses recognized, admired, and employed him for, but it was also the same quality he had used to take some of them out that would spell a new age of chaos and violence for the state of Mexico. On one hand, El Mencho was materialistic, disciplined, and thoroughly organized. On the other hand, he was violent, rash, and crude with his techniques. It was this unique ability to be those two things at the same time that struck fear of God in the hearts of his enemies. For example, most cartels have the habit of making their victims disappear. The Sinaloa cartel famously had El Pozo for more than a decade dissolve thousands of bodies in acid for the Sinaloa cartel, essentially causing tens of thousands of people to disappear. But El Mencho encouraged his cartel to do the exact opposite. Every corpse presented an opportunity for spectacle. Instead of making bodies disappear, they would butcher them and throw them in public streets or hang them from bridges. While recording the process, they would then post it on social media for the world to see. El Cholo was at the center of these activities. He knew firsthand what El Mencho was capable because he was the one who carried out most of his hits for him. In fact, when El Mencho seized power of the SJG in 2011, he became the boss's personal sicario. And maybe this is why he betrayed him. He had gotten so close to the man in charge that he lost perspective. El Mencho was a hard man, a man who gave answers and expected you to follow without question. El Cholo was a man with his own ideas. He wasn't a yes man, and it was only a matter of time before those ideas became seeds of rebellion. And in the world of cartels, the wages of rebellion is death. Soon enough, El Cholo began doing things he shouldn't do. His first act of rebellion came when he conducted without El Mencho's permission. El Mencho was, and still is, a strategic man, and he wouldn't have appreciated the gesture. It didn't take long for a loyalist named Marcos Hernandez, the cartel's financial operator, to snitch on El Cholo. El Mencho was furious at El Cholo, and El Cholo was furious at Marcos. However, the situation wasn't irredeemable, and there was a possibility that El Mencho would have forgiven his erring sicario if El Cholo had simply asked for forgiveness. But you see, El Cholo was on a path of self-destruction. He assassinated Marcos and essentially declared war on his former boss. Rather than making amends with El Mencho, El Cholo defected, took men from CJNG with him, and went ahead to form his own cartel. The cartel civil war. El Cholo's betrayal dealt a heavy blow to the CJNG. El Cholo took a handful of CJNG generals, including the CJNG's head of logistics, Eric Valencia Salazar, aka L85. There's no telling exactly how El Mencho felt about the exodus of betrayal, but I can tell you what happened next. El Mencho declared war, ordered a hit on El Cholo, and began attacking his new cartel, attempting to cut it down before it could ever become a real threat. But these were his former men and colleagues. It's safe to say that they already knew his tricks. First of all, the declaration of war didn't faze El Cholo one bit. The attempt on his life by El Mencho's hit squad failed miserably. It was so bad that El Cholo murdered the head of the hit squad sent after him, undermining his former boss once again. The war that followed was brutal enough as it was, but somehow it was about to get a lot worse, because El Cholo formed an alliance with the enemy, the Sinaloa cartel. With this alliance, they quickly found access to sources that allowed them to level the playing field. Now they could fight the CJNG on their own terms. Now it was all fair play. The Sinaloa cartel began using El Cholo's Nueve cartel that was mostly targeted at the CJNG. They even allowed them to take control of important sections of the Jalisco territory and some of Mexico's western states. The war that was tipping in El Cholo's favor. It was beginning to look like El Mencho would be defeated by his former sicario. The war that broke out was brutal and extensive, and unluckily for residents living there, Guadalajara was the stage of it all. And as both factions fought their bitter battle, innocent people were caught in the crossfire. In 2018, 3 film students in Guadalajara were driving home from school when members of the CJNG kidnapped and killed him. After confusing them for members of the Nueva cartel, public buses were set on fire. Broad-day shootouts were routinely conducted, and the body count kept on rising, until the entire city was filled with the stench of corpses and the fear of its residents. Meanwhile, El Cholo just kept on getting stronger and stronger. Whatever El Mencho was doing was not working. However, just when El Cholo seemed like he had won both the battle and the war, the worst thing happened on March 18th, 2021. El Cholo was captured by armed members of the SDG on the orders of El Mencho himself. In the video, see him sitting calmly, flanked on all sides by armed sicarios as he delivers a confession. My name is Carlos Enrique Sanchez Martinez, aka El Cholo, originally from Guadalajara. I'm here because I'm an enemy of CJNG. I met with Omar Garcia Harfic in the Federal District so that he could give me his backing. This is due to us both being after the CJNG, and he did give me his full support. But he told me that he needed something relevant so that I could operate with his support and his people among the city. The Omar Garcia that El Cholo implicated in this confession happened to be the sitting Mexico City police chief at the time. But it didn't end there. El Cholo rounded it off with a warning. Anyone that is still left supporting me, it's best for your own good to just start taking care of your families so that you don't end up like me. No one needs to tell you who wrote the confession. But the message was properly received. The individuals and officials he revealed immediately began to defend themselves. Omar Garcia Hartford refuted the claims in a tweet regarding a video in which a criminal kidnapped by other criminals made comments about me. I reiterate that I will not be distracted by false messages from criminals. My commitment to society is firm by crime to be the last consequences. All of the other public law officers he mentioned in the clip were fired. This was El Cholo's downfall, and he had taken his allies down with him. After this video, the Securis behind him proceeded to extend his torture over the course of a few days. This is an image of El Cholo before the CJNG captured him, and this is what he looked like just a few hours into his torture. El Cholo's gruesome death. That's how long El Cholo was tortured. It's unclear where the Socario started from, but the common knowledge is that he was kept alive for the length of those 48 hours, while he was pushed into the very edge of what anyone should adore. First his legs were destroyed. All the bones were broken and shattered into bits. Then the toes on his feet were chopped to bits, and the toes they missed were grinded. His broken ribs suggested that it had been smashed in. And this is where the whole situation becomes confusing, because no one is sure whether all of this was done before, during, or after. His body was savagely slashed and his eyes were gouged out. And did I mention, he was also electrocuted? But while everything I just mentioned is incredibly horrifying, none of it comes close to what happened next. Still alive while still breathing, El Cholo's tongue was clamped in a vice. It poured viciously out of his mouth. It was only after this that he was shot twice in the head. His body, or at least what was left of it, was wrapped in a plastic bag and dropped on a public bench, in true CJG fashion. So how did the Sinaloa cartel respond? They said nothing, did nothing. What about his cartel, the Mueba cartel? And his buddy Salazar? Same, said nothing. Did nothing. El Mencho had promised everyone who betrayed him that he would send a message. El Celo's death was received by everyone and delivered unmistakable, clear as day since then. No one has dared to cross El Mencho like El Cholo did, and from the looks of it, it seems like no one will anytime soon.